Good afternoon. Welcome to RTI's real-time market update on polyethylene and polypropylene. RTI is uniquely positioned to be presenting today. Our resin client base spans over 100 processors and has access to market knowledge exceeding 14 billion pounds of resin annually. Today, we're thrilled to answer your questions and transfer some of our knowledge. If for some reason we don't get to your question, please feel free to reach out to us using our contact information at the end. Now I would like to turn it over to Plastics News.
Well, good day, everyone. I'm Brennan Lafferty, publisher of Plastics News. Welcome to Ask the Expert. This is our new live stream series at Plastics News. With Ask the Expert, this is your chance to engage with professionals, to address the current business environment, to discuss best practices, and most importantly, ask some questions. This week's topic, the financial market. And we have 3 live streams scheduled this week dealing with today's the resin market, preserving liquidity, and finally, mergers and acquisitions. Today's topic specifically includes updates on the polyethylene and polypropylene resin markets. Our experts today are well-known advisors in the commodities market, RTI Global. Representing RTI are 2 of its vice presidents, Mike Burns and Scott Newell. Mike and Scott will answer your questions after their presentation. To submit a question to Mike or Scott, email pnevents@crane.com, or if you're watching this live stream on Facebook or LinkedIn, send your questions through those platforms. With that, I'll turn things over to our first expert, Mike Burns from RTI Global, to start us off. Take it away, Mike.
Thank you, Brennan, and thank you, Plastics News, for the opportunity to present today. We go ahead and move to the next slide and talk about the resin markets. Myself, I'm Mike Burns. I've been in the plastics industry for just over 30 years now. I've been with RTI since 2002. Before that, I sold raw materials, sat on the selling side of the table, and now I sit on the buying side of the table to help our customers with cutting-edge, best-in-class pricing, information that's going to help them make the best decisions to run their business. Next slide, please. So some of the RTI drivers, polyethylene market drivers that we want to follow all the time are up on the screen here. But today we're going to talk a little bit about what's currently important is the crude oil price, what's happening in the export market, operating rates and inventories, natural gas, the effect on ethylene and ethane, and what suppliers are doing in response to some of these changes in the markets. Next slide, please. So today's review, we're going to take a look at the COVID-19 demand, oil prices, exports, and supplier actions. Next slide, please. It's COVID-19 demand. The essential product demand was extremely busy starting in March, carrying to April, and now through May. Everything in the grocery stores touches plastics, from your dairy bottle to your detergent bottle, meat wrap, toilet paper wrap. The shelves are empty. It's all essential demand. The non-essential demand just restarted, and we've seen pickups. People are putting shelf stuff back on the shelf. Non-essential demand is picking up much faster, and the essential demand is still running strong. So you're still filling the aisles with essential products, and now you're putting on non-essential products, and it is an incredibly strong demand pull in the industry. March and April inventories were flat to down. I expect May inventories to be down as well. So the non-essential is extending this demand for polyethylene. Next slide, please. So oil, low oil prices, not so good for polyethylene. Why? The U.S. reduces production. When we reduce oil production, we're reducing natural gas production. Ethane is a byproduct of natural gas. They're only going to make ethane if it's profitable. And with less natural gas, the ethane price will go up. What does ethane do? Ethane makes ethylene. So higher ethane prices will lead to potentially higher ethylene costs. But it'll take a lot for the ethane price to go up, but it could. And we're seeing right now natural gas futures 6 months out from now, 3 months out from now, $1 higher than today. So we are expecting some higher ethane costs, which will firm up that ethylene market. This will be the first time in over 25 years where we have a U.S. market that has a feedstock push. Next slide, please. Exports. April exports very strong. May exports, I'm expecting a record May export number. We saw traders move 200 to 250 cars at very low prices. Suppliers sold out of exports. Reports now that suppliers have a backlog on export orders and are producing to meet exports. This is going to China. China restarted. China's buying. We are moving product to we are moving our export into China. Latin America is still suffering from some COVID issues, and their demand is very slow. China's taken it. We stepped in. We could do it. So if you look down below, what's important there is you've got 42% of the production exported in April. Could be higher in May. We did see a decrease at the same time in operating rates, 6% lower than the previous month. Still above 90%, still above the 3-year average, but a decrease in production. Next slide, please. So supplier actions. North America is oversupplied, period. 40% is being exported, too much resin. So what drives our price? Supply drives the price in North America. Operating rates, exports, and events. Today's operating rates are being looked at and cut. LBI and Dow have made announcements publicly that they're reducing rates. Exports, significantly high exports. Events, we've got one, COVID, and it's created demand, which was probably not expected. So oil and the global demand also drives exports. Oil pricing is going higher, but the naphtha pricing is even going higher faster because there's less oil produced, allows the U.S. to export all they want. Bottom line is product is moving. Operating rates and feedstocks may impact our resin markets for the first time this century. Next slide, please. Just a quick finish slide here. Cost models, North American, 25 to 28 cents based on the cost to make ethylene out of ethane today. Somewhere right around 10 cents, add some conversion. Cost to make ethylene to convert into a pellet in China and Southeast Asian regions, 41 cents. As long as we are below that number, we can export. As long as we can export, North American suppliers can control inventory. Next slide, please. So to conclude, some outlooks and strategies. Next 30 days, we're looking at additional manufacturing restarts. This sets up, with this very strong export market, a very good potential for the June increase. So we're looking at a potential 4-cent increase in the month of June. We've seen the off-grade prices already go up, the generic prime prices go up. So you need to manage your resin requirements with your suppliers because demand is good, exports are happening, resin pricing is going up. I would expect a price increase letter from suppliers in the next 10 to 15 days announcing one to prepare themselves for the 60, 90 days where we may see some firmer feedstock costs. We're going to have more exports, decreased productions, and we're heading into a very strong hurricane season that's been reported. We have the first one showing up, may hit the Gulf Coast next Sunday or Monday, a week, but already starting early in June. So that's it. With that, I'm going to turn this over to Scott Newell, who's going to talk about the polypropylene markets.
Yes, thank you, Mike, and thanks to Plastics News for having us. My name is Scott Newell. I cover polypropylene for RTI. And what I'm going to do today is just cover a couple of the key market drivers that are impacting polypropylene today, and then we're going to move into some questions. First thing I want to cover today is polypropylene's feedstock, propylene monomer. I've been getting a lot of questions here, especially with what's been happening to the oil markets. So first slide I want to look at is gasoline demand. So back in March, when the shelter-in-place protocols went into effect, gasoline demand drops off, pretty much gets cut in half. We are seeing gasoline demand start to rebound as the country starts to slowly reopen. Looks like it's about halfway back to where normal is, and it's probably going to take a little while for it to get all the way back. Next slide, please. So what's happened is our refinery rates have come down. Gasoline is the main product coming out of our refineries, and as demand gets cut, the refineries have to hit the brakes. And so we've been averaging just under 70% utilization rates. We really haven't seen rates increase with the uptick in gasoline demand just yet. What's likely happening is, margins at the refinery are very, very thin at the moment. And so instead of ramping up production right away, it's likely that they'll just maximize yields to get as much gasoline as possible. And then eventually we'll start to see rates pick up. I just think it's going to lag behind a little bit. So the problem for propylene is that we get 55% of our supply from the refinery. So as we're cutting rates, our propylene supply is getting squeezed. Next slide, please. Now, partly countering this, what's happening at the refinery is what's happening at the steam cracker. The steam cracker is kind of like the refinery of the petrochemical industry. It's there to make ethylene, but we do get propylene as a byproduct. It's actually our second largest source of supply. Now, how much propylene we get from the cracker depends on what feeds are getting cracked. And as oil prices started to come down, these heavier oil-based feeds like butane and naphtha also were coming down. They actually became advantaged, and the yields of propylene that we get from these heavier feeds is much greater. So that is partly offsetting the losses from the refinery. Now it is starting to change. Prices are moving up, butane, naphtha, especially as we look out into the forward curve. So they are losing their advantage. So that's just something we're going to have to keep an eye on as we move forward. Overall, between the refinery and the cracker, we've had a net loss of propylene. But what we didn't know in the beginning was exactly what would happen with demand. And as it turns out, demand for propylene derivatives has taken a big hit, especially polypropylene, and that has kind of offset the losses that we've seen on monomer. So now, next, when we look at propylene prices, initially we did see a little bit of a bounce in price, kind of the March, April timeframe. They've started to come back down, but overall, the U.S. has been able to maintain its price advantage throughout the globe. The May PGP contract price settled flat last week, 26 cents a pound. That's the lowest price we've seen going back to January of 2009 during the financial crisis. Next, please. So next, we're going to take a look at polypropylene demand. This data here is year to date through April. So we're definitely trending lower. But I will say we really didn't see a big impact from the pandemic until probably about halfway through April. But by the end of the month, we definitely saw the results in the April numbers. April demand was down 8.2% from March. Production was down 7%. And the numbers will look worse for May. Those numbers should be out in about a week, and not expecting a good performance there. Hopefully May is the worst of it. We are starting to hear from converters, starting to see orders come back in. I will say it's still way behind plan in most cases, but maybe starting to head in the right direction. Next, not all market segments within polypropylene are doing poorly. We do have winners and losers. Quick look at some of the market segment losers. You have compounders and transportation. Actually, much of the material coming out of compounders is going into the automotive industry. So it's really the automotive industry that's taken one of the biggest hits. But we have resellers, housewares, exports, all down. I will say within housewares and consumer products in general, there are certain items that are doing rather well. Next, please. Okay, here we're going to take a look at some of the winners where demand is up this year. We have spun bond and nonwovens. Of course, these are the materials that go into a lot of the medical masks and gowns. So demand is doing well there. We have BOPP film, caps, closures, cups and containers, all doing well. Most of the materials here go into food packaging or packaging in general. We're starting to hear too, with all these segments, the initial rush of demand is starting to moderate a little bit. So yeah, as I mentioned, we should see the May numbers in about a week, and will be interesting to see how they look, and hopefully things start to get better from there. So I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to turn it back over to Brennan, and we'll take some questions.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Great job. Yeah, yes, let's indeed get to some of these questions. As a reminder, if you didn't join us at the top, to submit a question to Mike and Scott, you've got a couple different avenues. You can email pnevents@crane.com, or if you're watching on a live stream from Facebook or LinkedIn, simply send those questions through that platform. All right, guys, we do have quite a bit of questions already. Question about polyethylene. I suspect this is for you, Mike. Major producers sent across a 2-cent price reduction letter at the end of April. Major indices reduced pricing 4 cents. The question is, how does that happen?
Well, the letters that came out from suppliers prior to the indexes reporting to try to stop an erosion. At that time, there was a lot of oil was down, feedstocks were down, demand was in question. There's a lot of pressure from the end use world looking for price relief. And I think it was suppliers threw out a nice little offer that it was 2 additional cents were added to that by the time the indexes were reporting at the end of the month. So the purpose of the reduction, and whenever there's a reduction, it's a signal of further to come, because they're trying to get ahead of the game, if you want to say that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Scott, a polypropylene question. If you have an indexed-based agreement, which index do you recommend? Do you guys recommend an index?
Not really. I mean, there's 2 indexes that are commonly used to set formula pricing. I really don't have a preference. I think either of them are fine for tracking the monthly movement. Yeah. Generally speaking, they do vary. Typically, when they aren't in sync, it's for a short period of time, and they end up catching back up to each other. So it's really don't have a preference there.
Gotcha. Yeah, I know we get that question even ourselves at Plastics News. Frank Esposito, our resin reporter, and Don Lepp, our editorial director, are often asked that. We track pricing ourselves, but it's really just for trends. We don't recommend people base their contracts on the pricing we provide either.
Right.
Yeah. So, Mike, I think back to you. What impact does low oil pricing have on global polyethylene pricing?
Well, oil's been one of the main drivers for the global price for the last 15 years. And now it's a little different because it's a lack of production that's driving it. Lower production rates means lower feedstock ability to make ethylene. Naphtha around the world, 60% of the world is used at a naphtha. We have lower naphtha production, which has driven that price up. Natural gas in the U.S. So the lower prices reduce production, and that turned out to have as a negative effect on the polyethylene world. Now, if demand drives the price back up, that's a better thing than cuts in production. So
right.
it strains the feedstock chain for polyethylene.
Okay. So an email has just come in from someone who's identified themselves as a new small contract injection molding company. Gentlemen, for both of you, how do we manage these fluctuations in price for both PE and PP? Any help there for this new custom injection molder?
Well, I'll go ahead and speak on polypropylene.
Yeah.
I guess the first thing I would say is actually polypropylene pricing hasn't been as volatile as we used to. It's been quite a bit more stable the past, I don't know, I guess year or so. Relative to history, where we used to see very large swings in pricing, you know, double digits, 10, 15 cents at times. So pricing's actually been a little bit more stable. Pricing is currently low. I would say if we're not already at a bottom, we're very close. And I'm expecting prices to be probably stable in the near term. And maybe by the end of the year, depending on, you know, how the economy does and how demand comes back, we will probably see prices start to lift from there. But as far as managing the fluctuations that we do have, there are some hedging platforms you can use to hedge your price. There's physical hedging. I would say there's material available right now. You could do a physical hedge and buy ahead, especially heading into the hurricane season. It might be a smart move. Yep.
I could follow up on that. You know, in our experience over the years working with clients, it's volume and relationships do not get you the best price. It's knowledge and being involved with the market and talking to people. Make sure you're getting the movements ahead of the reported movements. That's how you manage the fluctuation. Talking to people, make sure you're getting treated as fairly or better than your competition, and that's from having as much knowledge as possible. And not getting your knowledge from your supplier alone. They sell resin. That's so right. Talk to as many as you can. That's a good way to approach those fluctuations. Make sure you're ahead of the game.
Right. Yeah, probably. If you're a small contract injection molder, talk to other small contract injection molders as well. I would think. Yeah.
As many people as you can.
Many people. Yeah. Here's a question that's come in through LinkedIn. I think. We had a discussion point about nonwovens. This question asks, any difference for the trend for polypropylene to nonwovens in Europe versus the United States? Any insight on that, Scott?
Yeah, I know. I mean, I would assume, I don't know specifically in Europe, but I would imagine all around the globe, the demand for nonwovens has been strong, just like it has been here. Especially in China and the Far East, demand has been extremely high. Pricing there for these types of materials have actually started to carry a premium, or they were carrying a premium in the beginning. I know a lot of the capacity, polypropylene capacity over there was switched over to make more materials in the nonwovens market. That it has helped to bring that premium down. We haven't really seen premiums per se for these resins in the US. A lot of that material is contracted, formula pricing. So it hasn't seen the level of volatility, I guess, that's happened in the Far East. But demand has been strong for those materials across the globe. And like I said earlier, we are starting to see that moderate a little bit.
Okay, great. Another question about end markets, different end markets here though. Automotive and housewares. Question for both of you. When do you expect housewares and automotive sector to start its comeback or their comeback, or at least improve? You know, automotive certainly taking it on.
Very quickly on the polyethylene side, most of the polyethylene packaging goes into automotive. So it's putting parts into bags. And that right now is very slow. It's dead. People who are running essentials have taken up that slack. There's no, it's not there yet. And that's on the polyethylene side. We have not seen a rebound at all. It's right now at the bottom. So Scott can take on the polypropylene side.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think on the automotive side, I think it's going to be a pretty slow crawl back. Demand for automobiles is down. There's over 40 million Americans out of work. So I expect it to be a slow ramp up. Not only that, the other thing we're hearing in the automotive markets, a lot of the manufacturing has restarted. It's slowly starting to come back. But if you look at the supply chains in automotive, they're global, number one, and they're very broad, they're extensive, they're complicated. And so to bring all these parts and assemblies together, a lot of things need to work. And there's still parts coming from other countries, other locations that may not be starting up like we are at the same pace. So I think that's one of the biggest issues I'm hearing is just getting the whole supply chain in sync.
Yeah, there's so many in that automotive supply chain that are just, if one breaks down, it's a big problem.
Yeah.
I want to make sure we address this. Do you guys have any thought on that person's question about housewares in particular? He or she was asking about automotive and housewares.
Yeah, in housewares, I'm seeing some houseware products are doing very well to the point where it's difficult to keep product on the shelf. But there's other segments within that industry that are very slow and haven't picked up yet. So I don't know. That one is a tough one to say. I think it's going to depend on the economy, how well the country comes back. Do people start going back to work? And that actually is another one of the issues that I hear quite commonly. It's probably the biggest problem. One of the biggest problems I've heard from converters is labor, and it crosses all market segments in manufacturing. And I think people are just having a tough time staffing all their shifts as they come back, staffing weekends. And I think a lot of it in the beginning was fear. People were scared to come back, but what I'm hearing now is it's economic. A lot of workers are doing much better on the stimulus and are choosing to stay home at this time.
Right. Yeah, I've certainly heard the same. Although that's a short-term situation for those folks.
Right.
A couple more questions coming in from readers on LinkedIn and through the email. Do you think the positive trend for polypropylene in food packaging will continue in the next few months due to the fact that we're all reading about people eating at home and restaurants that are open can only be either outdoor dining or 50% capacity? Is this a longer term trend in your mind?
I don't know yet. I don't know how to. Definitely, there's been strong demand for food packaging. There's no question about that. And it really depends. It's certain parts of that market are down. The packaging that goes into, let's say, schools or institutions, restaurants, you name it, is all down. But the kind of packaging that may be in the grocery store is up. So I think there's been, especially in the beginning, it's really been a shift in the demand profile. The food that goes to restaurants is packaged differently than it is in the grocery store. And so it was kind of a demand shift, if you will, from essentially the same product or the same food, just different packaging. And I think they're starting to catch up now.
Yeah.
And we're seeing some of the mad rush into those markets is starting to moderate. But I do think that trend will continue, at least for in the near term. Mm-hmm. Restaurants are starting to open up, but it looks like it's going to be a slow crawl for them to get back to where they were.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. We're getting a few questions here, guys, about the recycled resin market. How do you see the markets for recycled resins in the next 3 months and through the end of the year? Do you see either PP or PE fluctuating value for the resale of recycled resins?
On the polyethylene side, unfortunately, we've done some and the cost of resin has been so low, and the cost of secondary market resin even lower, that it's not to an advantage to use recycled product. Recycled products starting to cost more. You do have a post-consumer need out there, and that's a different market. That's a small part of the market, post-consumer, but the recycling market right now, we've got recyclers that have too much inventory and are trying to make deals to move that. Hopefully that changes, but that's only going to change if the polyethylene price goes up or people are willing to pay more for recycled product.
Any thoughts on that, Scott? Or
yeah, it's same thing. In general, the recycling markets are struggling pretty bad right now, and it's basically because virgin pellets are so inexpensive. And I mean, there's a certain level of fixed cost within the recycling world, and there's almost a floor that gets set for price, and a lot of converters can buy either wide spec or off grade resins cheaper than they can recycled material. So it's been pretty tough. It's been pretty tough on these guys. And on the PCR markets, certainly there's been just a huge interest in PCR materials and sustainability in general. So there is a good demand there. I would say for the moment, though, as we are working our way through this pandemic, it's taken kind of a back seat, I would say. The priority of sustainability and PCR resins, especially the premium in price that the PCR resins carry, has kind of moved it down the priority list a little bit. Mm-hmm. But I think eventually the demand will be there and it'll come back.
Yeah. Here's an interesting question from the housewares market. Do you guys see retailers that sell housewares being more understanding in terms of resin agreements with plastics manufacturers and molders compared to the past in terms of passing through cost as resins move up and down?
I can tell you right now, they're already asking for price discounts, based on what they see out there. That they don't know that they don't understand the chain of costs and what happens with resin and what controls resin pricing. They just see cheap oil and cheap gas and want cheaper products on the shelves. I think I don't think they'll ever be understanding, and I think in fact they probably will go outside our borders as soon as they can, unfortunately.
Gotcha. Okay. Here's a question that came through our YouTube channel. How are PE prices likely to be impacted in 2021, Mike, and onwards as oil prices of $40 a barrel, as we see pricing around there?
Well, the key is oil production. If shale comes back, that's going to help the U.S. pricing. Going into this year, December, January was a very fair, balanced price with oil in the mid-50s. I would anticipate to be closer to that number, even closer to today's number going into 2021. The challenge is if they continue to reduce oil production for the next 6 months, you're going to see a feedstock push globally. And shale is, I don't think shale is going to let that happen. And that's the battle that we'll see over the maybe Q4, Q3 this year. So I would think that today's pricing is going to be very close to 2021 pricing.
Okay. Well, guys, I think that's all the time we have for questions, and it's not for a lack of questions by any means. But Scott, Mike, I'll leave it to you. Any parting words of advice for our viewers out there today?
June, I think, is going to be the most important month of this year for the real demand picture. Is this sustained? Are there any, the news cycle is changing things rapidly. Yeah, there may be a price increase this month, but June's going to be important. June will be a very telling about how demand is and what's happening as the stores start to reopen. Do people keep going back, or do they have enough toilet paper at home? That's the question.
Yeah. Scott, how about you? Any last words?
No, I would just say thank you for joining us today. We appreciate it. Hang in there, stay sane, and hopefully things start to get better soon.
Amen to that. Well, guys, thanks so much for sharing your insights today. For those of you watching, if you want to reach out directly to Mike and Scott, you can email them at the addresses that you see on the screen right there. I know they'd be happy to engage with you. Again, my thanks to RTI, and my biggest thanks are to you for joining us today for Ask the Expert. We hope you join us tomorrow at noon Eastern for the third and final installment in Financial Week. Tomorrow's topic, preserving liquidity. Our experts are John Baumgartner, Mike Benson, and Mike Kravosky from Stouts. So until tomorrow, have a great day. Thanks for watching Ask the Expert with Plastics News. I'm Brennan Lafferty. Stay tuned for a final message from RTI Global.